everyone, welcome back to the Good Deeds Podcast, Real Estate with a Mission. Today, I am sitting down with Diane Davidson to talk a little bit about how the market is going right now, how it's affecting buyers, and maybe some tips on ways that you can work your deal to make it a little bit easier.
Great.
Sounds good?
Yes, Nicole. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the market right now. Where should we see ourselves headed for the remainder of the year?
Well, there's still a housing shortage,
Uh-huh.
and it's still a bit competitive for buyers,
Mm-hmm.
certainly in certain price ranges and property types more than others. But when a property is attractively priced,
Mhm.
it usually experiences, it brings multiple offers.
Okay.
So what we try to do with our buyer clients is structure offers in such a way that the terms are attractive to a seller without ever compromising the buyer's position.
Okay.
May I explain?
Please do.
Okay. For instance, home inspections. We don't necessarily recommend that people waive home inspections. It's case by case, right? But there are ways to structure the language around home inspections. One little trick we have, not trick, but we will, among our recommended home inspectors, we will actually call a home inspector on behalf of our buyer clients or have them call, see how quickly they can book something, and then kind of have it penciled in. So we can put a realistic time frame into the offer by which that the buyer will have their inspection, therefore not trying to guess at it and maybe trying to, putting a date in that's too soon, but also not putting any time in that they don't need. So instead of arbitrarily 14 days or 10 days or 12 days, sometimes inspectors can come out the next day or 2 days later. And so now we have a 3-day home inspection contingency, which is much more attractive to a seller. And frankly, better for a buyer, because if it's not going to stay together, then they're not out of the market for any longer.
Right. That
So
makes sense.
A little tidbit.
Okay.
Right, a little tip. So things like that. So we look at, we've said this before, Bill and I have, we look at how many, all of the blanks on a purchase and sale, an offer. In New Hampshire, it's called a purchase and sale. We look at all of the blanks, and really only a couple of them deal with price. Everything else is terms. And so we really try to make the terms as tight as they can be, which again, really behooves the buyer and the seller sees the benefit. We have been told many times when representing buyers that their offer wasn't necessarily the highest, but the terms were the most attractive and cleanest for the seller.
Okay. All right. That sounds like a great tip.
Now, having said that, things are still pretty competitive. We are seeing more properties come back on the market. That could be a function of more buyers having inspections again, which we think is a wise thing to do, right? Sometimes buyers will our clients will put in a dollar amount up to which they will absorb repairs, so the seller understands that it's not necessarily the inspection is not being conducted for another bite at the apple price-wise, but really to gather information and decide how and if they'd like to move forward.
Okay.
Right? So there are all sorts of ways to sort of create the language that is very fair, very straightforward, and often very attractive to a seller.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there are certain property types or certain price points that are a little bit more difficult right now than others. What do you think is the most difficult?
That's a hard one because different areas, of course, in the state have different property types and ranges.
Okay.
So, I think sort of as people get into, I don't want to say entry level, but in sort of the lower price bands, those are often quite competitive. But again, things can be priced wrong in any price range, right?
True.
So that doesn't necessarily, a lower price does not necessarily mean that a bidding war will ensue.
Gotcha.
You bring up price though, and I know we had talked about this before the podcast. It's interesting too when we're counseling a buyer about the price that they may want to offer, right? People spend so much time thinking about how much over the list price or how much under the list price. And, the listing price is really, it's an action that a seller takes. It's a public offering that they would that they're hoping will encourage a reaction. And the reaction would be lots of showings and probably multiple offers. We ask our buyers to play pretend, if you will, to indulge us and kind of suspend reality. And I'll give you an example. If a property is on the market for $389,000, there was one in Bedford that sold for $501, right?
Wow.
So if then a property had been on the market for, let's say, $525, and somebody was able to buy it for $501, they would have been thrilled. They would have told all their friends that their agent got the property for them for $24,000 over the asking price, and yet it's the same $501, right? So the point here is that buyers often focus on list price and kind of say, but I offered 10% over or offered 12% over. In some cases, if we guided them to offer anything over, they'd be overpaying. And in other cases, if somebody's, let's say, looking at something in the 350 range, right? But they can afford to go into the low fours and mid fours.
Mhm.
Sometimes they feel like it's just too much, that's too far over the list price. And yet, if we had looked at that same house at 450, and they got it for 420, they think we were heroes. So we try to sort of turn it around a little bit and explain that it's really the value or the price that you end at that you need to focus on,
Right.
not how much over the asking price.
Right.
Right?
Okay, that
I mean,
makes
no one
sense.
thinks that way in an auction.
True.
You know, if
Very
we start
true.
the bid at 100, I don't want to go X over the 100. They just want to know where they want to end. And we're very sensitive to the fact too that, you know, somebody might be able to spend a certain amount, but they might not love a particular house that much.
Right.
So let's say their ranges, you know, their target price is 500,000. They might see a house at 420 that they want to pay 420 for, or 415 or 430 because they don't love it 500. And the last thing we ever do is push.
Gotcha.
The point I want to make here is it would be irresponsible of us as buyer agents representing our buyer clients to always suggest that they pay asking or more than asking, because, like I said, the asking price is a public offering that is the first action that's taken, hoping for a reaction, right? And so their offer or lack of making an offer is a reaction. And so we're not necessarily heroes if they get to buy the property for less than the list price, nor are we villains if they offer much more and are successful as long as they're comfortable with the price. So we really try to get our buyers to focus less on the asking price other than it gets them in the door
Right.
to see the property.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
When you speak about these terms, I know you mentioned the time for the inspections. Are there any terms that you think are often forgotten that you could be a bargaining chip that an agent can play?
I think there are often terms that are included that could be omitted if we, with our clients, do our homework in advance.
Okay.
So there's a particular provision in our contract, it's paragraph 15, which deals with, it's called due diligence, and it's an opportunity for them to review documents. If it's a condominium, then all the condominium documents. If there's a homeowners association, the covenants, the availability of a property and casualty insurance. So there are things that we can actually take care of with them prior to making the offer so that they're able to waive all of those reviews and make themselves a much more attractive buyer.
Okay.
And so we invest the time up front and it's paid off for our clients.
That makes a lot of sense because I think a lot of the agents might just go through there and see that while they're making the offer and not even put thought into that before they start writing it at all.
You know, I think we discussed before, but in case anyone's watching this podcast out of order or listening, we really always try very hard to we have a consultation with our buyer clients first, or prospective buyer clients. And when we decide to work together, we have a little placeholder for 15 or 20 minutes to go through a mock offer so that we're explaining to them what these strategies are before it's real time, before they're in the heat of passion, before there's an offer deadline, before they are seeing a house and running off to the airport. And so they understand and have an opportunity to ask any questions about why we strategize or suggest strategizing the way we do. And it's very, very valuable because it's really important it's a big decision. It's a big financial commitment.
Of course.
It's important for them to understand the whys, not just the house, but the whys behind them, and also to invite anybody in. A lot of people have friends who are going to advise, relatives will advise, a lawyer they want to show something to, and so we just want to make sure that if there are any questions or hesitations, it comes out in the abstract and not in the heat of the moment. Because the last thing we want is for anyone to have remorse. Yeah. I mentioned before that properties are coming back on the market more than they have been.
I was going to ask.
Yep, and I think oftentimes it happens after an inspection, but I think at least half of the time it's not because of what was found in the inspection, but because buyers have buyer's remorse and can use that as a way to get out, to unwind the transaction. And so I think people are feeling sometimes a little stressed about the whole thing. So the last thing we want to do is put our buyers in that position.
Right. Want to make it as smooth as possible all the way through.
Yeah, they don't have to be happy with their decision.
Okay.
And it doesn't always happen. I mean, people do wake up the next morning and return the dress, right?
Yeah, that's true. I've done that quite a few
Some
times.
tags on the closet, but I mean to return them. Really, I do.
So if there was one thing that you wish people knew about making an offer and how that might help in this seller's market, what is that?
Okay, so I will say, to be with an agent that understands that every single blank. There's no such thing as standard on a contract. If there was, well, anything that's printed is standard, but with 102 blanks, there's a lot that's not standard. It's negotiable, right? And so I would say we treat each blank as if that might be the only differentiating factor if they're making an offer and somebody else is making an offer. And when you treat each one as if it's the only differentiating factor, we know it is never that way. It's not really apples and apples except for, but all together it makes for an attractive offer for the seller. And that's the whole idea. Again, without compromising our buyer's position, it's strengthening that position.
Right. So take into consideration everything that you can, and then individually go through each one.
Yep.
And see what you can do.
Strategize with each blank.
All right. I like that a lot. So Diane, there was one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch back on a little bit. You mentioned that paying over list price doesn't necessarily mean overpaying. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that there are two houses on the market and they're exactly the same again. No such thing as apples and apples, but just pretend, okay? And one of them is on the market for $400,000 and one is on for $500,000, right? And the one that's on the market for $400,000 sells for $450,000. So somebody paid $50,000 over the asking price, and the one that's on the market for $500,000, same day, same set of buyers, whatever, same pool of buyers. One that's on the market for $500,000 sells for $490,000, and those people are like all excited because they got it for $10,000 less than the asking price. They didn't get a great deal.
No,
they didn't. They may have overpaid by paying less than the asking price, and the people who paid $50,000 over the asking price probably got a great deal. Right? Does that make sense?
it does. My question to you is, in your experience, does the price that they paid reflect what they could resell it for in the future?
I need a crystal ball. Depends on when in the future. Yes, at some point in the future.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the mentality that people go into it with sometimes. It's like, well, I paid this much and I'm going to get more when I sell it. Well, not necessarily. Especially if you overpay enough too.
Right.
I
mean, it's all, the market is cyclical. Yeah. There will absolutely be a point when it's worth more. There may be a point when it's worth less, right? And it also depends on the circumstances. So many times when buyers are, especially if they're starting out in the market, but oftentimes buyers are either making a lateral move or they're moving up in price. If they're making a lateral move, it really doesn't matter if the market's up 10% or down 10% or whatever that is, because it's all the same, right? It's one big transaction.
Right.
If the market is down, and as long as someone hasn't lost all of their equity and doesn't have money to make the next investment in another home. But if you buy a $400,000 home and it loses 10% of its value at $360,000, but you're trading up to what was an $800,000 home and it loses 10%, now you're buying it for $720,000, right? So when you're trading up, you actually kind of wouldn't mind a market that's down.
Oh, okay.
Because a percentage of a higher number is a bigger savings.
All right. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. So
after 43 years doing this,
you've learned a thing or two, I would imagine.
Not really 43 until February, but yep. So that's it for now. Thanks for tuning in to Good Deeds Real Estate with a Mission. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or watch our podcast on your favorite platform.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Bye.